When is on time really on time? Trump tries to derail the IMO's net zero plans, and container shipping warned of a decade-long downturn. All these stories and much more on the latest episode of Maritime in Minutes. Hi, it's Marcus Hand, editor of Seatrade Maritime News here, with our August news roundup, Maritime in Minutes, and I'm joined as usual by our correspondent Gary Howard. We'll be discussing the shipping news stories that stood out for us over the last month. Quite a varied and interesting month news-wise for what is the traditionally August silly season, so I'm going to hand over to Gary to kick us off by taking us back to the first week of August.
Yeah, so the numbers never lie, but they can tell some different stories. Nick Savides kicked off August with a great story looking at the reliability claims of the Gemini Corporation, the Maersk and Hapag-Lloyd team-up famously targeting that 90% reliability goal. While an individual shipper is probably quite aware of whether their ship or container is on time or not, working that out for an entire network is actually slightly more tricky, and analysts take a different approach to calculating if a ship is on time or not. Nick spoke to Maersk, to Hapag-Lloyd, and to analysts EC and Sea Intelligence to get the bottom of why Gemini has a 90% plus reliability score by Sea Intelligence's calculations, but just over 80% by some of EC's workings out. Boxline schedules are pretty much always in fluctuation, and the difference in schedule reliability score effectively comes down to which schedule you compare the arrival and departure times against. EC uses the published pro forma schedules, the first ones that come out, while Sea Intelligence completely ignores the first 14 days after a schedule is published due to just how frequently those new schedules are changed. Sea Intelligence instead picks a schedule from a random date 14 to 28 days before a ship is due to arrive in Europe and calculates against that, hence their higher reliability scores. Obviously, if you took the schedule from the week before the ship has arrived, there's not a lot that's going to go wrong in that last week anyway. Check the full story for much more detail on the different approaches and their sort of individual respective values. It's always useful to sharpen up on the variables in the data and the methodology to help figure out what the numbers are really telling you and how they might be being spun by whoever's behind the scenes. Marcus, you've got something a bit less data-driven, I think.
Rather, actually. I'm starting out the month with a story on the Houthi. The Red Sea situation has gone relatively quiet in August, but it's worth remembering, even now, it's less than 2 months since the attacks on the Magic Seas and the Eternity Sea. And in the latter case, 11 still remain held captive after they were sort of quote-unquote rescued by the Houthi. The lull in attacks is welcome and somewhat unexpected as the Houthi appeared to be ratcheting up pressure on shipping in early August. The Houthis' Humanitarian Operations Coordination Center said it had sent letters to 64 owners of vessels which it described as having violated its blockade of Israeli ports. The letters, which were described as pre-penalty notices, follow on from a warning on 27th July by the Houthi that they would target all ships belonging to any company that deals with Israel's ports, regardless of the ship's nationality. The group latterly added that it could expand targeting of those ship owners, and it warned that this could include entities engaged in business with them as well. As of the time of recording, the Houthi have not attacked any further ships in the Red Sea, instead focusing more on direct Israeli targets, so hopefully this period of calm continues. If you're enjoying the Seatrade Maritime podcast, make sure you never miss an episode by subscribing on the app of your choice.
Sticking with the impact on shipping of Israel's war in Gaza, I picked up a little release from Bahri, which had a lot of clicks actually in quite a short period of time. Bahri issued a statement denying that it had shipped weapons for Israel or any cargoes bound for Israel, a response to media coverage a few days prior. These sorts of releases are always pretty helpful to the blissfully ignorant like myself. I had no idea this allegation had been made. I guess it's not quite the Streisand effect, as they weren't trying to bury the information, but a similar effect. Bahri's categorical denial of carrying Israeli shipments seems to have come after workers from Italy's USB union refused to work on a ro-ro vessel, Bahri Yanbu, at Genoa after claiming to find a large shipment of weapons on board. The union's own releases and recollections around the event make no mention of Israel whatsoever, or the destination for the shipment of weapons, but it did allege that the cargo lacked some of the appropriate paperwork. The refusal to work on the vessel seems to stem from a sort of current initiative by the union to prevent any armed shipments via Italian ports under its We Will Not Work for War campaign. USB and other European unions within that campaign have refused to work on other ships, specifically due to shipments tied to Israel or on their way to Israel, believing that certain materials may be used to support what they see as genocide in Gaza. The connection between Bahri and Israeli cargo seems to have been made in sort of various socialist media outlets. I tried to dig into this, but helpfully had no response from Bahri when attempting to find out more details of the shipment in question. Bahri's statement said it operates strictly in line with the kingdom's declared and consistent policies in support of the Palestinian cause. It has never transported any goods or shipments to Israel and has never been involved in any such operations in any capacity. I will be in Saudi Arabia at the start of October for the Saudi Maritime Logistics Congress, and I'll see if I can get some clarification from Bahri. We have a lot of attendees from Bahri at the show, although I suspect there's only so much information any shipping company is going to want to say about where any weapons cargoes are heading to and from, but we'll see if we can get some more information while I'm out in the kingdom. Marcus?
Yeah, I'm going to move over to the US, and I'm back with the T word, the seemingly inescapable President Trump. It's well known that he thinks climate change is a hoax, so it's hardly surprising that the current US administration doesn't have much time for the IMO's emissions goals for shipping. However, a joint statement that was issued by the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Secretary of Commerce Howard Lutnick, Secretary of Energy Chris Wright, and Secretary of Transportation Sean Duffy, saying the Trump administration unequivocally rejects the IMO's net zero framework, took things to a whole new level. Now, not only did they reject the net zero framework, they threatened nations that support it as well. As our correspondent Barry Parker noted, the US is far down the leaderboards in terms of deep-sea commercial vessel ownership, so one less vote from a nation of modern tonnage, in theory, should not matter that much. However, the vast business influence of the US on deep-sea trade does run very deep, and therefore this is actually rather significant. Countries supporting the IMO's net zero framework, and thereby potentially making shipping of goods more expensive for American consumers, would likely face the Trump weapon of choice, tariffs, which would, if imposed, make goods more expensive for American consumers. I'll leave listeners to work out the logic of that for themselves. But it does potentially throw a very large spanner in the works of getting approval of the net zero framework at the IMO in October, and we'll be following that at the time.
Right, I guess I'll take us into week 3. The CMB.Tech merger with Golden Ocean got the go-ahead as expected on the 20th of August, and the all-share deal now creates a 250-vessel behemoth, dry bulk, crude tankers, chemical tankers, box ships, offshore wind vessels, and there's a sprinkling of port vessels in there as well. CMB.Tech puts its fleet value at $11.1 billion now, with an average fleet age of 6.1 years. Golden Ocean shares have disappeared from Oslo and Nasdaq, as was planned back in April when the deal was announced, and there's a $2 billion refinancing deal carried out for Golden Ocean's outstanding debt. The deal sees Golden Ocean join Euronav as the sort of latest well-known maritime name, poised, I expect, to become just another brand under the CMB.Tech umbrella, albeit this process rather smoother than what we saw for the tanker owner, which was, well, we got a lot more stories out of that one, let's put it that way. As we record now, though, the CMB.Tech second quarter results came out this morning. I'll be covering those on Seatrade Maritime News very shortly. The headline figures is a $7.6 million loss for the quarter, 8 new vessel deliveries. And the release also notes that there was about 12% of shareholders in Golden Ocean are holding out for evaluation of their shares under Bermuda law. These dissenting shareholders, as they're called, they do not affect the merger process. The merger has happened and, they can't undo it. But these shareholders could be in for some extra cash should the Bermuda courts decide that their share price was set too low. We'll keep an eye on that. I don't know what the likelihood of that is going one way or the other. But speaking of low prices, Marcus, how's the outlook looking for the container market?
Possibly not that good. The alarm bells are increasingly starting to ring over container shipping's seemingly unstoppable new building order binge, and what the impact of that will be on the sector in the coming years. It's a topic that Seatrade Maritime Newsliner expert Nick Savides has been delving into. Analyst Analytica highlighted that the container ship order book has reached its highest level since 2010, with some 31.7% of the current fleet now on order. It noted that the last time vessel orders exceeded this level was in the period 2004 to 2009, which, as we all know, resulted in overcapacity and a supply overhang that took some 10 years to clear. A week later, Linealytica did proffer a solution of sorts that if container lines scrapped 4.5 million TEU in ship capacity by 2030, it would keep the market in balance. There's a couple of problems with this idea, though. It would involve lines recycling more capacity in the next 4 years than they've done in the last decade. And even if they actually want to do this, there's not enough shipbreaking yard capacity that is compliant with the Hong Kong Convention, which came into force a couple of months back. Meanwhile, the order book continues to rise, and fellow analyst Alphaliner said it was about to cross the 10 million TEU barrier. Although they did seem somewhat less negative about the sector's ability to deal with this huge volume of new ships, I must admit I do tend to side with Linealytica on this one. Anything from past evidence says that eventually this is going to catch up with the sector. And I'm sure we'll have plenty to write about.
This is what fuels the cycles, right? That's why it keeps going up and down again.
Indeed.
That sounds like we need more shipbuilding capacity then. The focus on US shipbuilding from the current administration over there seems to be reaping some rewards, as Hanwha commits to $5 billion of infrastructure investment into its US yard, Hanwha Philly Shipyard. The Korean group bought the yard late in 2024, I think for $100 million, and has now announced plans for 2 additional docks, 3 quays, and a potential block assembly facility as well. The plans will boost production capacity from fewer than 2 vessels per year to 20. Alongside the announcement of these investments, Hanwha also said it had ordered 10 MR tankers from the yard, the first due for delivery in 2029, and it firmed up an option for an LNG carrier, adding to an order placed last month for an LNG carrier. One thing worth noting, though, is that the first LNG carrier order was placed on a joint build model with, quote, a significant portion, end quote, of the construction to be carried out in South Korea. The $5 billion investment from Hanwha forms part of a $150 billion commitment from South Korea to invest in US shipbuilding, which includes training workers and maintenance of US Navy ships, among other things. Our man in the US, Barry Parker, looked at the broader US-South Korean shipbuilding tie-up in a piece. South Korea plays shipbuilding trump card in US relations, and that includes the tie-up between HD Hyundai and alternative investment giant Cerberus Capital, which has got some backing from Korean Development Bank. This will create a sort of multi-billion-dollar joint investment fund to strengthen the maritime capabilities of the US and its allies across shipbuilding and more in the maritime sphere. Samsung Heavy Industries has also announced plans to work with the US with some partners on US naval maintenance. All of these announcements, of course, stem from the Trump administration's focus on sort of America first in shipping, including by punishing vessels built outside of the US through the port fees, especially for those built in China. And US import tariffs also seem to be tied to how cooperative nations are in other areas of the US economy, the sort of stick driving many nations to work with America's deal maker in chief. Marcus, I think you're going to finish us off for August.
Indeed I am, and it kind of follows on from that, because actually part of this story that I'm going to talk about did mention the USTR and the impact that is having and the uncertainty that it is making in the shipping markets, and that's really the theme of this final story, which is from a conference held by the Institute of Chartered Shipbrokers in Singapore, which I attended. The event was themed around geopolitics and featured a fireside chat from Peter Norberg, the CEO of Swire Bulk. Peter highlighted that the impact of geopolitical events on shipping is nothing new, and he's seen it across his career. However, what is different in the current climate is that disruption is hitting the industry from all sides. This has created uncertainty for cargo owners, which results in a change in the relationship they have with tramp shipping providers like Swire Bulk. He said their customers were challenged about how they can make long-term contracts for their commodities and therefore are unable to commit to shipping. As a result, there was a tendency for markets to become more and more short-term. This, in turn, creates difficulties for ship owners who are looking to make investments in, say, dual-fuel tonnage with a 25-year lifetime. But on the flip side of that, the cargo owner will only give them a 12-month commitment to a new, more environmentally friendly ship. So you can see what the problem is there. With that, that is all we have time for on this episode of Maritime Minutes. Links to all the stories discussed are in the show notes, and thank you for listening, and we look forward to joining you on the next episode of the Seatrade Maritime Podcast.